My name is Charlene Cormandy. I work in EPA's Water Security Division, and today I'm here to conduct Module 1 of our 3-module training on America's Water Infrastructure Act. And in this module, we're going to give you all an overview of Section 2013 of AWIA, which requires certain community water systems to conduct or update risk and resilience assessments and emergency response plans. We're also going to cover the process by which a community water system can certify to EPA that they have completed their risk and resilience assessment and emergency response plan. Before we launch into the workshop content, I'm going to pass it off to our workshop facilitator, Mackenzie, who's going to walk us through some of the administrative notes for this training.
Thank you. So here is a training outline for the next few days and what we'll cover. So today we will cover the first module, which provides an overview of AWIA Section 2013, as well as background, how to certify your risk and resilience assessments and emergency response plans, and AWIA Section 2018. Then in Module 2, we will cover the risk and resilience assessment requirements and the tools that EPA has developed to assist you in conducting your AWIA compliant risk and resilience assessment. Then we'll have Module 3, which will cover the emergency response plan requirements and the emergency response plan guidance and template that was developed to assist community water systems in developing and updating an AWIA compliant emergency response plan. Next slide, please. Great, thank you so much. So we'll start out with a poll for today. So we would like to know what best describes your organization. Is it a water utility, a consultant, state, tribal, or agency representative, or other? So it looks like we have about 75% from water utilities, 13% are from consultants, and then 6% are either state, tribal, agency representatives, and then we have 6% who are other. Thank you all so much for those responses. Welcome all today. We're glad that you're able to join us. And that is all from me. Back to you, Charlene.
Thanks, Mackenzie. So to get to the content for today, we have 3 main goals. The first is to understand the history, requirements, and deadlines of Section 2013 of AWIA. The second is to review the 3 methods by which you can certify to EPA that you have completed your AWIA compliant risk and resilience assessment and emergency response plan. The third goal is to learn about the new chemical spill release notification requirements and accessing chemical inventory data, which is AWIA Section 2018. So let's get to it. First, we will discuss AWIA Section 2013, Sections A through F, which replaces the Safe Drinking Water Act, Section 1433. So the purpose of this portion of the training is to ensure that you're aware of the updates of AWIA, which was passed in 2018, to the Safe Drinking Water Act, Section 1433, which was originally added by the Public Health Security and Bioterrorism Preparedness and Response Act, or Bioterrorism Act for short, of 2002. AWIA Section 2013 expands the risk types addressed in a public water systems assessment to include risks of both natural hazards and malevolent acts. In addition, community water systems are required to evaluate the resilience of their current physical infrastructure and their management practices, including financial capacity to respond to these risks. And then based on that assessment, water systems must develop an emergency response plan, or update if you already have one, that addresses the risk and resilience issues that your system might face as identified in the assessment portion. We will also review some of the common types of emergencies that are faced by utilities in your region. Today, our workshop is for Region 4. The risk assessment and the emergency response plan certifications only apply to community drinking water systems that serve 3,300 or more people. And you might have funding on your mind, so we'll also discuss the funding that's available to date. Okay, so prior to AWIA, the Bioterrorism Act of 2002, which added Section 1433 to the Safe Drinking Water Act, required that water systems assess their vulnerabilities to terrorist or other intentional acts, and then based on that assessment, prepare emergency response plans. The statute required community water systems to conduct a vulnerability assessment by set deadlines that were in the law and to submit a copy of this assessment to EPA, as well as develop an emergency response plan and certify completion of that emergency response plan to EPA. It didn't require them to periodically update their risk assessments or emergency response plans. This was just a one-time requirement. The vulnerability assessments were meant to identify risks associated with terrorist attacks or other intentional acts that were designed to disrupt the water system. And this also required that EPA protect information in those vulnerability assessments submitted by water systems. So we have them at EPA headquarters in a vault. EPA also provided technical assistance to certain community water systems based on these assessments. And EPA was named as the primary agency that's responsible for enforcing this section of the Safe Drinking Water Act. So that is the original Safe Drinking Water Act, Section 1433. AWIA amends Safe Drinking Water Act, Section 1433. And it requires not only an initial risk assessment and emergency response plans, but this new requirement includes recertification every 5 years. It also includes malevolent acts and natural hazards, while the Bioterrorism Act only included intentional malevolent acts. EPA will also provide guidance to very small systems, that is systems that serve under 3,300 individuals who are not required to comply with the certification requirements of Section 2013 of AWIA. EPA directly enforces Section 1433, just like the Bioterrorism Act. And I just want to note here that AWIA is a large law with multiple different sections. We're going to be spending most of our time on AWIA Section 2013. Because of this, I might say AWIA requirements as a shorthand instead of saying AWIA Section 2013 over and over again. But please note that by AWIA requirements, I'm talking about Section 2013 of AWIA specifically. At the end of this module, Module 1, I'm going to be spending a little bit of time talking about AWIA Section 2018, but for the other two modules and the vast majority of today, I'm going to be talking about 2013, and I'll make it really clear when we switch to 2018. Okay, so now that we have talked about AWIA Section 2013 and the similarities and the differences with the Bioterrorism Act that it replaced, let's talk about the two big AWIA Section 2013 requirements, starting with this risk and resilience assessment. The requirements of what needs to be included in your risk and resilience assessment are listed up here on the slide. And this is a sneak peek. We're going to be going over this in much more detail in Module 2 of this workshop, so I'm not going to spend too much time going over these requirements right now, but here they are for your information. And so here's my summary of steps to take for your risk and resilience assessment. Community water systems should develop or update their risk and resilience assessment according to these 10 requirements that are on the slide that are required by law. They must certify to EPA that they've done this by the deadline, maintain records of this assessment at your facility for 5 years, and then review and update if needed, and then recertify every 5 years. And so here are the requirements of what needs to be included in your emergency response plan. Again, this is a sneak peek. We're going to be going over these requirements in much more detail in Module 3 of this workshop, so you can look forward to a deep dive into these criteria later on in our workshop if you're and so here's my summary for the steps that you take for emergency response plans. Develop or update, if you already have one, an emergency response plan based on the information that you put together in your risk and resilience assessment, and making sure that you include the 4 criteria that are on this slide. Then you certify to EPA that you've done this by the deadline. The deadline is 6 months after you submit your risk and resilience assessment. Maintain records of it at your facility for 5 years, just like the risk and resilience assessment required. And then review, update, and recertify your emergency response plan every 5 years, again, just like the risk and resilience assessment requirement. So who does the new AWIA requirement apply to? If you are a drinking water system that serves a population greater than 3,300 people, and you're considered to be a community water system, then this applies to you. If you're a wholesale utility, this also applies to you. Please note that AWIA requirements apply to drinking water systems, not wastewater systems. So if you're a combined system, you only have to address the drinking water part. Okay, so let's start out with a poll question. What is your utility service size? So it looks like vast majority, 82%, are in the AWIA small size category. And then we have 8% who are under 3,300, 8% who are in the medium size category, and 2% who serve over 100,000. So if you're a drinking water system that serves a population greater than 3,300 and you're considered a community water system, then this applies to you. If you're a wholesale utility, this also applies to you, and include the population that you sell water to when you're determining your population size served by your utility in terms of AWIA. And if you responded, I don't know, you can reach out to dwresilience@epa.gov to confirm your population service size if there's any question about what it is. Okay, so I'd like to take a moment to describe how the AWIA required risk and resilience assessments and emergency response plans fit within a larger water resilience framework. Many utilities ask us how they can start building resilience. And so here is a basic framework with steps that can help you towards becoming more resilient. We recommend that you start with assessing your risks, because in order to prepare for a potential emergency, we need to understand the utility's threats and vulnerabilities. And this assessment step includes creating an AWIA compliant risk and resilience assessment. The next step is to plan for an emergency, which involves things like creating an AWIA compliant emergency response plan. And so these first 2 steps, assess and plan, that's now required by law, thanks to AWIA Section 2013. And these other steps, train, respond, and recover, they're not required by AWIA, but they're important steps to make sure that you are prepared to respond in the face of an emergency. So training can involve training your staff on emergency response protocols, conducting exercises to practice coordination at the local, state, and national levels. And examples of this are participating in tabletop or full-scale exercises, which you can get guidance on leading these sorts of exercises on our website. Then the respond step, the 4th step in the framework, is when a disaster recurs, whether that's routine, like a water main break, or something like a natural disaster, hurricane, or something like that. You need to have the right tools available to respond. And our Response on the Go app is one tool that can help you with responding to an emergency. We'll bring that Response on the Go app up again when we get to our third module that talks all about emergency response plans. And for the recovery phase, having resources available to restore services as quickly as possible is an important step. And we have a tool called Fed Funds that can help you find federal funding for this recovery phase after an incident occurs. So if you're not sure where to start, check out the tools that EPA has developed to assist in each of these steps towards becoming more resilient. And our Route to Resilience tool is a voluntary resource that you can use to help your water utility walk through the 5 steps of this water resilience framework that we just went over. This is a side note. It's not directly related to AWIA. I'm sharing this information as a resource for you that can help you put the risk and resilience assessments and emergency response plans that are required by AWIA into a larger framework for resiliency that your utility might want to use. So if you're interested, download the Route to Resilience tool. It uses brief videos and a really easy to navigate interface that guides users through the process of building their own unique roadmap to resilience report, because each utility is unique. And this Route to Resilience report presents 5 steps along the way, which are the 5 that we just went over: assess, plan, train, respond, and recover, where utility personnel learn what it means for a water utility to be resilient and what tools and resources are available to help in this goal of becoming more resilient. So as we're getting into this training, we want you to start thinking about the types of natural hazards and malevolent acts that you might be faced with and need to plan for at your utility. So both the risk assessments and emergency response plans require that you look at natural hazards and malevolent acts. And so here are some examples of natural hazards that might affect you all in Region 4. Our examples are flooding and hurricane, which are related oftentimes. And then for the malevolent acts side of things, cyber intrusion, which is a real big issue nowadays. Contamination, whether that be accidental or purposeful contamination. Vandalism of a water system's property, or an active shooter scenario. So while you're working through your risk assessments and your emergency response plans, please note that the Water Security Division has many technical support products that can help you get information on security and resilience for water systems that face these types of threats. And please note that taking mitigation steps is not required by AWIA. Just creating the risk and resilience assessment and emergency response plans are required. And then here up on the slide, this is a link to resources that we currently have available to help you with these threats. Okay, so now I'm going to share this video as an example of one of the resources that we have available to help utilities in planning to mitigate against the threat of flooding. EPA has other guides to address drought, power outages, earthquakes, and other hazards that your utility might face, but we thought that the flood resilience guide would be a good one to take a look at. So let's take a minute to watch this video about this EPA resource.
Addressing flood risk and increasing resilience. Berwick, Maine.
Part of EPA's mission is to help water and wastewater utilities build resiliency to disasters. Resiliency means the ability of that utility to maintain operations during a disaster, or if there is damage done, to be able to reduce that level of damage, or if they lose their ability to serve water or wastewater, that they'll be able to restore those operations quickly. There are tens of thousands of water and wastewater utilities around the country that face all sorts of disasters, hazards, extreme events. We want to assist with that resiliency And we want them to understand that the way that you can build resiliency is to look at vulnerabilities and then to identify measures that can mitigate those hazards.
We're here in Berwick to work on a resiliency pilot project to look at some of the vulnerabilities and ways to mitigate those vulnerabilities, in this case, flooding.
We had two 100-year floods, one year and one the next year. It was totally unexpected. And the second one came with little warning.
Over the past 2 days, we've conducted an on-site vulnerability assessment for the Berwick Water Department and their water treatment plant, their storage system, their intake system, and their distribution system.
So what we're hoping to do is give them some standard things that they can do, some checklists that they can work through, and vulnerabilities that they can look for in their water systems to try and come up with some sort of mitigation measures.
Increasing your utility's resilience to flooding will help you become better prepared for and prevent damage from future flooding events, especially considering that climate change impacts could result in more frequent and more intense flooding. You can assess your current resilience to flooding and improve your ability to reduce impacts by following these 4 steps. Understanding the threat of flooding by evaluating the likelihood and the potential severity of flooding at your utility. Identifying vulnerable assets and determining consequences by assessing critical operations and equipment that may be disabled or damaged by flooding. Identifying and evaluating mitigation measures by considering actions that will protect your utility from future flooding and developing a plan to implement mitigation measures by prioritizing cost-effective mitigation measures and scheduling completion.
First and foremost, one of the things we recommend to water systems to do is get to know their local emergency manager, because that's going to be the key to opening up state and federal funds to help avoid damage from future storms.
I'd be implementing some planning right away and some low-cost alternatives right away, and then looking at the big budget picture for other things.
We're encouraging utilities to not wait for a disaster because it's much more costly after a disaster to restore operation, and people's health and welfare are at stake.
Think ahead. Make plans now. Reduce the risk, and you'll be happy in the end.
EPA has many products to help utilities assess their vulnerabilities and go through this process themselves. Get started today at water.epa.gov/infrastructure/water security.
Great. So as you saw in that video, EPA has a lot of resources available to help you prepare for flooding events, as well as a host of other events. So feel free to check out our website for more information on those resources. Okay, so we just talked about the flooding resilience guide that can provide you with information on natural hazards. So I wanted to mention an example of a resource that EPA has developed to support utilities with identifying malevolent acts that could occur at a water system, because that malevolent acts is the other thing that you need to keep in mind, because it's also required by AWIA. So we have resources for that as well. So what types of funding are available? The grant funding that is stated in the law has not yet been appropriated by Congress. So what funds are available for use? Water systems can access funding through the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program. These funds can be used to conduct a risk assessment since it addresses resilience of the system, and the risk assessment might yield a project that the utility may want to invest in to improve overall systems resilience. States may also choose to dedicate some of their set-aside funds towards risk and resilience assessment or emergency response plan development, and each state manages this differently. So please check in with your state to see how it works. in your area. As far as enforcement goes, EPA's main goal is to return the water system to compliance and protect public health. Section 1414 is an enforcement provision that EPA can invoke to address a public water system's non-compliance with the Act. And Section 1414I defines applicable requirement broadly, and it expressly includes Section 1433. So if a community water system fails to comply with a requirement under Section 1433, for example, if a system fails to certify that they've conducted a risk and resilience assessment or an emergency response plan by the statutory deadline, then EPA may exercise its enforcement discretion by initiating an action under Section 1414. And here are the actions that EPA can bring under Section 1414. EPA can bring an action to require compliance or can seek a civil penalty. But the overall goal with enforcement is to return the system to compliance so that we can protect public health. Okay, so here is a quiz question. Yes or no? Your utility serves a population size of 4,000. Are you required to certify completion of your risk assessment? So I'm very happy with these results. 100% of you got it right. Yes, all community water systems that serve over 3,300 people are required to certify that they've completed a risk assessment, and then 6 months later, an emergency response plan. So since the utility serves 4,000, they would be required to comply. Another question, yes or no? Your utility is a combined water system. Does your AWIA compliant risk assessment have to cover both the drinking water and the wastewater side of the operation? It looks like 76% of attendees said no, 24% of you all said yes. So the correct answer to this question is no. AWIA requirements only apply to drinking water, not wastewater. So a combined system would only need to cover the drinking water portion of their operation. Now I'm going to walk through how to certify a risk assessment and emergency response plan. This slide shows certification deadlines for risk assessments based on populations served by your utility. For populations in the largest size category, you'll see that those deadlines have already passed. For utilities that are in the medium size category, 50,000 to 99,999, certify your risk assessment no later than December 31st of this year. And utilities in our smallest size category, 3,301 to 49,999, which is based on the first poll we had, the majority of our attendees today. You must certify your risk assessment no later than June 30th of 2021. And just note that population served size is being determined using the Safe Drinking Water Information System, or SIDWIS, date from the fourth quarter of 2018, which is when AWIA was signed into law. Then the ERP certification is due no later than 6 months after the risk assessment is certified. So if your utility certifies earlier than the deadline, the 6 months starts from the date that you submit the certification for the risk assessment, not the deadline dates. For example, if my utility serves a population of 75,000 and I certify completion of my risk assessment on July 31st, 2020, then the certification of the emergency response plan is due no later than January 31st, 2021. Here's some more requirements related to certifications. You must review, update your risk and resilience assessments and emergency response plans every 5 years and recertify them to EPA. Also maintain a copy of the assessment and the plans for 5 years after the date it was certified, because that is also required by law. You won't submit a copy of either document to EPA though, just those certifications. And we often get this question, who is qualified to certify a risk assessment or an emergency response plan? And the answer is that the law doesn't stipulate who the certifying official must be, but they must be from the water utility. So each water utility can decide which employee is going to be their certifying official. There are 3 ways to certify completion of risk assessments and emergency response plans. These include our secure online electronic submission, which is our preferred method, and also we think the easiest to complete. If you use the electronic submission platform, you will have some benefits, such as reminders before your next 5-year risk and resilience assessment and emergency response plan submission is due, and also a confirmation of your submission for your records. Email and regular mail submission is also available using designated certification forms that EPA has created. But you won't get a confirmation email from EPA if you use these 2 methods. So if you want confirmation for your records, you're going to want to use the electronic submission platform. And then this is just a note here. Please don't send in your actual risk assessments or emergency response plans. Only submit the certification form saying that they have been completed. Please keep the actual plans on file at your utility. All right, so here is just a demo video about how to certify. And we're not going to watch this video just for time's sake. So you can go to this link and you can watch it on your own time. I just want to put this slide in here to show you that there's lots of technical help to make the process really easy to submit using our electronic certification platform. We also have a PDF guide that will walk you through it step by step if you prefer that to a video. And we have an email and a phone number for a help desk as well. Okay, so while online submission is our preferred method, your utility may also use email to certify. What you would do is you would complete and then sign the fillable PDF certification document that's available on EPA's website and email it to this email address. The PDF allows for electronic signature, so no need to print it out and scan it if you don't want to. This is what the certification form looks like. Please just double check the email address and PWS ID that you put in there to mitigate errors. And our third submission option is that you can print this PDF out and mail it to this address up on this slide. There isn't a way to confirm that we've received your certification, both by the mail and the email method, but with mail you could get a preferred tracking number to make sure it was delivered. All right, time for another quiz question. True or false? Community water systems shouldn't send their actual assessment and emergency response plan documents to EPA. They should only submit a certification statement that these documents have been completed in accordance with AWIA Section 2013. All right, 99% of you got the right answer. True. Risk and resilience assessments might contain sensitive utility information, for example, drinking water intake locations. So we don't want you to send them to us at EPA. Just send in the certification saying that it's been completed to EPA, and then keep it on file at your utility in a safe place. Okay, a poll. Do you manage utilities with multiple PWS ID numbers? Okay, so for the 20% of you who said yes, you do manage multiple PWS ID numbers. You need to certify each PWS ID number because AWIA compliance tracking is done by PWS ID, as I mentioned in relation to the question that came up earlier. So in our electronic certification system, you can add multiple individual systems under one username. Just make sure that you certify for each one individually. So for example, if you oversee 5 PWS ID numbers, you would need to submit 5 different certification forms. Now I'm going to go over some of the questions that we frequently get. I think we've thoroughly covered this one. Do I need to send in a copy of the documents? No, please just submit the certification statement. And then this question, will my information be protected? Here's the official information on the slide on protection from disclosure. But in general, your information in the assessment and the emergency response plan is protected because EPA is only requiring utilities to certify their plans. Thus, EPA won't have any of this sensitive information contained within a risk assessment and emergency response plan. Please do note, however, that EPA has the authority to request to review AWIA, risk and resilience assessments, or emergency response plans. And EPA retains this authority mostly for quality assurance purposes. So some states already require a vulnerability assessment, for example. Can I use that? And just to reiterate, this is normally in response, well, it could be for the risk assessment or the emergency response plan. Often comes up with the emergency response plan. This is a sort of half and half answer. So your state required plan likely requires some of the AWIA Section 2013 requirements, but possibly not all. So for example, previous vulnerability assessments from the Bioterrorism Act of 2002 don't cover natural hazards, nor financial infrastructure or monitoring systems. So just make sure that you're looking at this updated law, AWIA Section 2013, and then add to your already existing plan, if you have one, anything that's been added since the plan was originally created, plus any of those extra requirements that are in AWIA that might not be required by our state. And we have resources available to help you guide you through the process of making sure you're meeting all of the requirements in the law if you'd like to use it. And we're going to be reviewing those voluntary compliance resources in more detail in Module 2 and 3. And this one, we addressed this in the poll question that we just had. So in summary, you can make a plan however you want. It can be a big assessment or it can be separate assessments, but you need to submit a certification for each PWSID if you manage multiple PWSIDs. How soon can you submit a certification? At any time. Just make sure it's in by the deadline. Okay, so this question, how does AWIA impact transient non-community water systems and non-transient non-community water systems? I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Under the Safe Drinking Water Act, there's 3 types of public water systems: community water systems, transient non-community water systems, and non-transient non-community water systems. AWIA only applies to community water systems, which is defined as a public water system that supplies water to the same population year-round. So sometimes we get asked this question about how it applies to these other 2 types of systems, and I have the definition of those on the screen. And so the short answer is that AWIA doesn't apply to these other 2 types of public water systems, only to community water systems, which again, I have it in bold on the slide, are defined as public water systems that supply water to the same population year-round. If you have any questions about what category your water system falls into, what type of public water system you are, please visit this website for more information that can help you figure out which category you belong to. And we talked about this before. Is there guidance for very small systems? There isn't, but there will be, and it is required by law. So this will be available. The plan is to release it in 2021. So check back on our website for that. What do I do if a new facility comes online after the compliance deadline? Your utility would follow the deadline required by the system, that system size, in the next 5-year period. Who can certify? We talked about this one a little bit. Certifying official just needs to be someone from the utility. This question often comes up when a contractor is helping a water system create their risk assessment or their emergency response plan. That's great. Contractors can definitely help prepare those documents, but they cannot certify. A utility representative needs to be the one to submit the certification. Okay, so we're going to be going over the risk and resilience assessments and emergency response plans in the next 2 modules. So you'll find out more about those requirements if you attend those modules. But here's a sneak peek at some of the questions that we get about risk assessments and emergency response plans. What is specifically meant by financial infrastructure under the risk and resilience assessment component requirements? We define that as billing, payment, and financial account management systems, including those that are operated by a third party. And then will EPA be providing directive on cybersecurity part of the ERP requirements? So as background, one of the required components of the ERP states that you must include strategies and resources to improve the resilience of the system, including physical and cybersecurity of the system. So that's written in the law. But beyond that statement, there are no mandatory components beyond what is stated. However, EPA does provide training on cybersecurity incident response planning. So check out our website if you are interested in more information on the cybersecurity component of resilience. Will the 5-year cycle certification due dates be based on the date you previously submitted, or 5 years from the initial due dates of the Act? It's not based on the initial certification date. Don't worry, you don't have to remember the date that you originally submitted your risk assessment 5 years later. That next 5-year cycle deadline for your risk assessment will be based on the dates that are specified in the original law. And I just wanted to mention that there are third-party standards out there to help with risk assessments and emergency response plans. And you can use any standards that you want. In this workshop, we're going to be telling you about the tools that EPA has created to help you comply with AWIA, but you can use whatever method works for your utility. As long as it complies with all the requirements of the law, you're good to go. Okay, so that is the end of our FAQ section. We're at the last topic of Module 1, so stay with me for just a little bit longer. During this part of the presentation, we're switching gears. We're going to discuss Section 2018 of AWIA. Please note, Section 2018 doesn't require utilities to do anything. We're talking about this topic because the information could be useful and beneficial to water utilities. So again, Section 2018 doesn't require your water utility to do anything. It requires other regulated parties in your community to do something that could benefit your water utility. And this will become more clear how Section 2018 benefits the water sector as I explain further. Let's just start with some background information. AWIA was signed into law in October of 2018, and it's a sweeping law that's aimed at improving the resilience of community drinking water systems. And there are many sections of AWIA. We've been talking about Section 2013 this whole time. Now we're going to look at another section that might be of interest to this group, which is Section 2018 on source water. So Section 2018 focuses on spills and releases, whether they're intentional or accidental, and then the potential contamination that could be caused to a community water system from such a spill. So most of the provisions of AWIA that affect the water sector, they amend the Safe Drinking Water Act, but Section 2018 is different. It amends the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, or ECRA. I will be using that acronym because that is a very long title of the act, so ECRA. The purpose of the AWIA revisions is to mitigate the risk of acute contamination to sources of drinking water, so specifically threats of spills into sources of drinking water. The Section 2018 provisions were motivated by several spills that have occurred over the past several years that impacted drinking water supplies. Probably many of you might remember this very notable spill of 10,000 gallons of MCHM into the Elk River, which is the drinking water source for Charleston, West Virginia, back in 2014. And when that contaminated water passed through the treatment plant and into the drinking water distribution system, it caused significant public health and economic consequences. Okay, so now we're going to talk about a little overview of EPCRA, which is what AWIA Section 2018 amends. It was signed into law back in 1986, and it was created to help communities plan for chemical emergencies and address concerns of environmental safety hazards that are posed by storing and handling of toxic chemicals. The community that's regulated by EPCRA are the facilities that produce, use, or store hazardous chemicals in quantities above specified thresholds. EPCRA is administered by EPA's Office of Emergency Management, and it's implemented by state emergency response commissions or tribal emergency response commissions, TERCs, and local emergency planning committees or LEPCs. So I'm going to take a pause right here and talk about what these are for those of you who might not be familiar with CERCs and TERCs. So the governor of each state has designated a CERC that implements EPCRA procedures in that state, and their role is to do the following. They establish procedures for receiving and processing requests for information collected under EPCRA. CERCs or TERCs review local emergency response plans, and they designate their local emergency planning districts and appoint local emergency planning committees, LEPCs, for each district. Then they supervise those activities of the LEPCs. So the specific sections of EPCRA that are amended of Section 2018 are these two shown on the slide in orange and bolded. Section 304, which is on emergency notifications, and Section 312, which is on chemical inventories. So we're going to talk about those in more detail later. Just note that there are other sections of EPCRA, and we're just focusing on the ones that were amended under Section 2018 of AWIA that we think we're talking about it today because we think that it has important information for utilities to know. All right, so now let's talk about EPCRA Section 304 and the amendments that Section 2018 of AWIA make to it. First of all, what is EPCRA Section 304? The 304 requirements cover 355 extremely hazardous substances, EHSs, and over 700 hazardous substances that are subject to the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, or CERCLA, which is also known as Superfund. That is also a long act title. And so Section 304 requires that facilities immediately, within 15 minutes, notify the LEPC and the CERC or the TERC if there's a release into the environment of a hazardous substance above quantities set in regulation. And this immediate report needs to be done over phone, radio, or in person. And then for the CERCLA releases, the Superfund releases, you must also notify the National Response Center. And emergency notification requirements for transportation incidents can be met by calling 911. So here's what the emergency notification needs to include from the facility that has an accidental release of the chemical to the CERC, TERC, and LEPC. Chemical name, if it's an extremely hazardous substance, how much was released, time and duration, the medium it was released into, known health risks, precautions that should be taken, so should you evacuate, and the name and telephone number of a contact person for more information. So then, as soon as practicable, a written follow-up notice must be provided to the CERC or TERC and LEPC. The written notice needs to provide any updates that there have been to the information that we just went over on the previous slide, and additional information on what actions have been taken to respond to and contain the release. health risks, and if appropriate, advice on medical attention that's needed for people who are exposed. So, in summary, Section 304 requires an initial notification and a written follow-up after a spill by the facility that has the facility to the CERC, TURC, and LEPC. So how is Section 304 amended under AWIA Section 2018? You'll find that these amendments are beneficial to the water sector, which is why we're talking about it on this training today. The amended Section 304 now requires that the CERCs and the TURCs, once they get an initial notification from a facility of a spill, that they notify the agency that's responsible for implementing the Safe Drinking Water Act, so the Drinking Water Primacy Agency, of a release of these substances. And this includes both the prompt notification and follow-up reporting. So before, facilities notified the CERC or the TURC, and then the legal requirements stopped there. But now there's another step. The CERC and the TURC must forward that notification onto the Drinking Water Primacy Agency. Once again, this is just a reminder, the same information that was provided by the facility to the CERC needs to be provided to the Drinking Water Primacy Agency. And same with written notification. The same thing is required, just forward that information along. The CERC will forward it along to the primacy agency. Then there's another step. So once the Drinking Water Primacy Agency gets the notification from the CERC or the TURC, they need to forward those notices to community water systems whose source waters are affected by the release. So both the initial and the written follow-up need to be forwarded to the community water systems whose source waters might be affected. And then if a state doesn't have a Drinking Water Primacy Agency, so Wyoming, Washington, D.C., several of the tribal nations, they don't have state primacy agencies, then the CERC or the TURC is required to directly forward those notifications along to the water systems. Okay, I know that that was a lot of content, and I'm hoping that this visual kind of puts it all together for you. So here's a visual of the requirements of the amendments to AWIA Section 304, all in one place, starting with this orange bucket with the arrow to the first green bucket. That is the original AWIA Section 304 requirement. An initial notification and a written follow-up notification need to go from the facility to the CERC or the TURC. Now on to the amendments, which are represented by the rest of these green boxes. The diagram visibly shows how the amended Section 304 requires CERCs to then notify Drinking Water Primacy Agency, and again, both initial notification and follow-up reporting. Then the Drinking Water Primacy Agency needs to send that information on to the community water systems whose source water is affected by the release. And then this pathway along the bottom here, this is just to say that if there's no state primacy agency, then the CERC directly notifies the community water system. That was AWIA Section 304. Now let's move on to AWIA Section 312 and the AWIA Section 2018 amendments that updated it. So OSHA regulations require facilities to have a safety data sheet, or SDS. It used to be called a material safety data sheet, if some of you are used to MSDS is the acronym, but they've recently changed it to safety data sheet, so that's what I'll call it for this presentation. So they need to have a safety data sheet for hazardous chemicals that they store or use. AWIA Section 311 requires facilities that handle or store OSHA hazardous chemicals to submit that safety data sheet to the CERC, TURC, LAPC, and local fire department. Section 312 requires facilities that handle and store these OSHA hazardous chemicals to submit an annual chemical inventory, which includes things like the identity of the chemical, quantities, and locations within the facility, to the CERC, TURC, LAPC, and local fire department. Then listed up here on the slide, this is the information that the inventory needs to include. So chemical name, estimated amount, storage, location, and then this last part, an indication of whether the owner elects to withhold location information from disclosure to the public. That's usually due to proprietary reasons for their chemical. So Section 312 is a two-tiered approach. Tier 2 is the stricter of the two tiers, and it requires all the information in Tier 1 plus information on specific chemicals and location and storage. So Tier 2 is what we're talking about today with the AWIA amendments. All right, that's the original Section 312 and 311 and 312 of ACRA. How did AWIA amend it? The AWIA amendments require CERCs, TURCs, and LEPCs to provide community water systems with chemical inventory data that's collected under Tier 2 for that system's source water area upon request. So you do need to request it, but it is legally required to be provided to a community water system. So this is a beneficial change for the water sector because in absence of this provision, access to Tier 2 chemical inventories were subject to interpretation by the CERC, TURC, and LEPC, and water utilities weren't always successful at obtaining this data without resorting to extensive measures. Okay, so that's AWIA Section 2018. And since we discussed Section 2013 already today, I wanted to quickly mention some of the connections that can be drawn between Section 2018 and Section 2013. Okay, so we think it's a good idea for water systems to become members of their LEPC for several reasons. First, to make sure that the Community Emergency Response Plan includes community water systems that also handle extremely hazardous substances like chlorine. Also, can make it easier for your water system to obtain Tier 2 information easily and immediately, and get emergency release notification under 304 that might affect your waters. AWIA requires systems to coordinate with your LEPC to the extent possible. That's something that's written in the law. And so since AWIA requires you to do it anyways, you might as well join while you're at it so that you can reap the benefits that we just talked about. Requesting Tier 2 chemical data can also help inform your risk and resilience assessment. And risk to a chemical spill can be incorporated into your emergency response plan from Section 2013. So those are just some lines that we drew between the two. Again, Section 2013, community water system serving over 3,300 have to do something. They have to do the risk assessments and the emergency response plans. Section 2018, there's nothing that you have to do, but other facilities in your area have requirements that could benefit you. So keep that information in mind. And here are resources that EPA has available on the subject. Again, we're going to be giving you, there's a resource document, so feel free to check out our website on AWIA Section 2018 for any more information. And here I just wanted to quickly put up on the slide our Section 2018 contacts. So if you have Section 2013 contacts, you can come to me. That's what I'm specifically focusing on. But for Section 2018, these are our subject matter experts. So I just wanted to make sure to give you their information in case you had questions for them about what we talked about today. So thank you everyone. For more information, or if you have any questions about the material that I presented today, feel free to contact us at dwresilience@epa.gov. And you can also take a look at our website for information as we update it on our AWIA page.